Humanity had spent years speaking in meeting halls that echoed across the Interstellar Council. But no matter how many times their representatives tried to warn others, the room always carried the same quiet, polite rejection. The other species often admired humans for their creativity and drive, yet when it came to danger, they believed humans worried too much, imagined too much, or reacted too quickly. Humans saw risk before anyone else, and the Council often laughed it off as human overthinking. For a long time, humanity tried to stay patient. They presented reports filled with clear signs of movement along the outer borders, strange signals that kept repeating, and unexplained disappearances of small ships. They had proof, numbers, patterns, everything needed to raise an alarm. But the Council brushed aside the warnings with gentle smiles and long speeches about maintaining calm. To them, humans were a young species who always assumed the worst. They believed the galaxy was stable, safe, and too orderly for any real threat to appear without their notice. One representative from Earth, a quiet and calm man known for being careful with his words, tried one last time to explain what humans saw coming. He showed the gathered members a series of recordings. At first, the room remained silent. Many leaned forward, curious. But when the footage ended, several council members exchanged looks that carried more annoyance than concern. One of them stood and gave a long explanation about how the data was still within acceptable limits. Another said that humans often misunderstood the movements of unknown groups. A third member suggested humanity was letting imagination get ahead of reason. But the human representative didn't argue back. He simply closed his files, nodded once, and returned to his seat. In the past, humanity would have tried again and again, raising their voice, pleading with the Council to consider the risks. This time, however, they chose something different. Something no one expected. They chose silence. At first, the silence was small. Humans stopped adding extra comments in meetings. They no longer tried to correct or remind anyone. Their speeches became short and direct. They stopped sharing side notes, stopped sending daily updates, and stopped reminding others about small border events that could have been early warnings. The Council noticed, but many members thought the silence was temporary. They assumed humans were simply tired or frustrated. But humans were not acting out of stubbornness or emotion. They were studying, preparing, and watching in a way no other species had done. As days passed, the silence deepened. Humanity withdrew its representatives from several lower committees. Their communication channels, which were usually busy all day, went quiet. The large screens that once displayed human reports remained blank. Some council members felt something strange in the air, but didn't know how to respond. A few even joked that humans were finally taking a break, but the truth was far more serious. Humans had realized that no amount of talking would change the Council's mind. Their warnings had been ignored so many times that speaking further felt like shouting into an empty room. So they did something the Council never expected a human civilization to do. They stopped trying to convince anyone. Instead, they quietly returned to their own territory and focused entirely on preparation. Engineers on Earth and several human colonies began working day and night, checking old defense plans, updating communication systems, and running drills. They reviewed evacuation strategies and strengthened border patrol routes with careful precision. Command centers across human space began to operate on a new schedule, one that matched the pattern of the threat they believed was coming. The Council had no idea any of this was happening. They saw humans step back and assumed it was simply a diplomatic silence. They believed Earth was sulking or trying to make a point through absence. That assumption made the silence feel harmless. No one questioned why humans suddenly stopped attending even the informal meetings. No one wondered why their reports stopped arriving. And no one bothered to check what was happening on the borders. What the Council didn't realize was that Human silence was not a sign of weakness. It was a strategy. Humans had learned through old history that sometimes silence carried more weight than spoken words. Sometimes the refusal to argue forced others to confront their own pride. And sometimes silence gave them the space to act without interruption. The council's pride was the quiet wall that kept them from seeing the truth. Many of the elder species believed nothing serious could happen without their awareness. They believed they were the natural leaders of the galaxy, guiding younger species like teachers guide children. This belief made them assume that if there was a real threat, they would sense it first. But they never did. Humans, on the other hand, sensed danger long before it arrived. They listened to their instincts, to their data, and to the strange patterns that didn't fit normal behavior. And when the council rejected their warnings again and again, humans stopped speaking and started preparing. A few smaller species noticed the silence and grew uneasy. Some approached the human station politely, asking why the reports had stopped. But the human response was always calm and short. Nothing disrespectful, nothing emotional, just enough to end the conversation without revealing anything important. Those species walked away confused. Something in the human tone felt final, like a door had quietly closed, and no one realized it until they were standing outside. Meanwhile, in Earth's main command center, experts studied every strange signal closely. They watched how they repeated. They tracked the direction they came from. They compared them with old records from centuries before. The more they studied, the more certain they became that a dangerous force was moving closer. Humans did not panic. They did not scream or make dramatic announcements. They prepared with steady hands and focused minds. Each day, the council held meetings and made speeches about unity, balance, and peace. Each day, humans worked silently behind the scenes, tightening their defenses and gathering their fleets. Weeks later, the council finally realized something was changing, but they misread every sign. Instead of seeing the silence as a signal of danger, they saw it as arrogance. Some of them whispered that humans thought too highly of themselves. Others claimed humanity was trying to force the council into attention by refusing to speak. The real reason, however, was much simpler. Humans were done wasting their breath. They had tried. They had warned. They had shown evidence again and again. They had spoken loudly, softly, and patiently. Nothing changed, so they chose silence, not as punishment, but as acceptance. Acceptance that the council's pride was too strong to break through words alone. The silence grew heavier over time. Some council members noticed the empty human seats during important discussions. Others felt that meetings felt strangely incomplete without human arguments and questions. A few younger members wondered if they had made a mistake by ignoring the humans. But none of them were ready to admit it openly. Eventually, a small group of council observers decided to look deeper into human activity. They expected to find a species still frustrated but passive. Instead, they discovered something they did not understand at all. Human ships were moving in organized patterns. Their colonies were preparing for something large. Their fleets were gathering near key points. It was subtle, but to anyone watching carefully, the signs were unmistakable. Humans were preparing for war, or at least for something that could become one. The observers rushed to show this information to the council leaders, but even then, many brushed it aside. Some claimed humans were exaggerating. Others said humanity was simply performing routine checks. A few even laughed quietly, saying humans always work too hard for no reason. Once again, the warning was ignored, and once again, humans stopped speaking. They knew that soon. The council would understand everything without a single human word. They knew reality would speak louder than any report they could file. And when that moment arrived, the silence would be remembered not as anger, but as the quiet before a storm. Humanity had withdrawn, not out of fear, but out of clarity. They knew what was coming, and they knew the council would not believe them until the danger was standing at their door. The silence was not a retreat. It was preparation, and the price of ignoring it would soon begin. After withdrawing from the council meetings, humanity turned all its attention inward. No one outside their own colonies knew what they were doing. Communication with other species became minimal, only what was necessary, and even that was carefully measured. While the council assumed humans were sulking or being dramatic, Earth scientists, engineers, and leaders were quietly coordinating something much larger. Every decision, every action was purposeful, yet almost invisible to the outside eye. Human colonies on distant planets became hubs of activity. Engineers worked around the clock, repairing old starships and upgrading them with new defensive technology. Pilots trained in simulations that mimicked real scenarios of attacks or blockades. Scientists studied strange signals that humans had recorded for years, but which other species considered unimportant. Slowly, humanity was building a network, connecting resources from one planet to another, ensuring that no colony would be left isolated if danger struck. Despite the intense work, there was no chaos. Humans moved with calm, steady precision. Even in the busiest command centers, there was a sense of quiet control. Orders were given and followed, but people spoke in normal voices. They laughed quietly when a simulation failed. They celebrated small victories when a new technology passed tests. No one overreacted. No one panicked. It was as if they already knew the storm was coming, and they had already decided they would meet it on their own terms. Meanwhile, the council continued its meetings without human representatives. They discussed trade, security, and diplomacy, all while assuming humans were simply taking a break. Some leaders thought that if humanity had wanted to warn them, they would have done so already. Others suggested sending a small delegation to check if Earth was still committed to the council. But the majority preferred to ignore the silence, thinking it temporary. They were confident that humanity, for all its drive and intelligence, could not survive independently for long if a real threat appeared. No one understood how wrong they were. Humans were not merely surviving, they were preparing. They were building hidden supply stations, gathering resources from asteroid belts and unclaimed territories, and creating mobile command centers capable of moving quickly between systems. Every action was calculated. Every resource was accounted for. The humans were creating a network that could operate independently of the council, capable of sustaining them through months of crisis. And yet, they never bragged about it. They never announced it. They simply did it. In one colony, a group of engineers gathered around a simulation table. They were testing a scenario where multiple fleets arrived at the same time, attacking human colonies in different sectors. The simulation showed failure. At first, resources spread too thin, communications delayed, panic spreading among the population. The humans studied every step. They adjusted fleet movements, refined communication protocols, and coordinated logistics until the simulation succeeded. The sense of satisfaction in the room was quiet, almost humble, but it was real. They were not training for glory. They were preparing for survival. The council, meanwhile, believed they had nothing to worry about. They assumed humanity was still under their influence, still bound to follow their rules. This was one of the council's biggest mistakes. Humans had stopped waiting for approval. They had stopped trying to please or convince anyone. They were no longer negotiating, explaining, or justifying. Humanity had realized that in a crisis, action mattered more than words. If the council failed to act, humanity would handle the consequences themselves. Even communication from humans was carefully controlled. They sent neutral messages to other species, messages that confirmed normal activity but gave no extra information. A routine report here, a simple confirmation there. Nothing alarming, nothing threatening. It was enough to keep suspicion low. No species realized that behind every message Humans were calculating timelines, analyzing threats, and planning contingencies. The human fleet, which the Council had long underestimated, quietly expanded. Older ships were upgraded, equipped with faster engines, stronger shields, and advanced navigation systems. Younger pilots were trained to handle complex combat scenarios, but always under strict discipline. No one acted out of fear. No one acted out of ego. Every decision was measured, precise, and deliberate. Humanity understood that overconfidence could be as dangerous as the threat itself. Even within the civilian population, there was an unspoken understanding. People carried out daily routines, worked in factories, taught in schools, and maintained their lives, all while knowing something larger was being prepared behind the scenes. There was no hysteria. There was no panic. Citizens trusted their leaders and their systems. They understood the importance of patience, quiet preparation, and careful attention to detail. It was not blind faith, it was a human instinct for survival that had developed over centuries. One of the key strengths of humanity's preparation was communication. Humans had built encrypted channels that the Council could not monitor. Through these channels, colonies shared intelligence about resource availability, fleet movements, and potential threats. Unlike the Council, humans shared information only when it mattered. This selective communication allowed them to act as a single organism, despite being spread across multiple planets and systems. Every colony knew its role, and every individual understood their contribution. Meanwhile, the Council's arrogance continued to blind them. They believed that if there was a real threat, humans would speak up. They assumed the human silence was temporary, a minor inconvenience in the greater galactic system. Some Council members even mocked the silence, calling it childish, naive, or stubborn. They did not notice how much they had underestimated the humans' capacity for independent action. They could not see that humans had learned to work without approval, to prepare without acknowledgement, and to survive without recognition. Weeks turned into months. Humanity continued its quiet expansion of resources, fleets, and strategic positions. They ran simulations of every imaginable scenario, planning for unexpected attacks, natural disasters, and even sabotage. They prepared for long-term isolation if the Council completely ignored them. Every plan was precise, every calculation exact. Humans trusted their own judgment because experience had taught them that sometimes the world did not listen, and waiting for approval could mean disaster. Occasionally, smaller species began to notice hints of human activity. Ships appeared where none were expected. Supply stations were operational in hidden regions. Pilots were seen practicing maneuvers that seemed unnecessary for routine patrols. These anomalies caused curiosity and some unease. A few tried to ask humans directly what was happening, but every question received only a calm, measured response. Nothing alarming, nothing revealing. The humans had learned that information was power, and careful control of it was crucial. Back on Earth, the leaders convened in the main command center. They discussed the potential scale of the threat, weighing every known factor against their predictions. Maps covered the walls, showing colonies, fleet positions, and resource caches. Computers projected future scenarios based on current trends. Every angle was considered. Every possibility was analyzed. Decisions were debated calmly, logically, and thoroughly. Humans knew that panic or rushed choices could ruin months of preparation. The Council, by contrast, remained unaware of these preparations. They continued their routines, assuming everything was under control. They did not realize that humans had become something they could no longer control, a species capable of independent strategy, long-term planning, and decisive action. Humans had learned a valuable lesson from centuries of being underestimated. Trust your own instincts. Trust your own abilities, and prepare in silence if no one else listens. Humanity's withdrawal from the Council meetings which once seemed passive, had become the first step in a careful strategy. They had stopped trying to convince others. They had stopped waiting for recognition. Instead, they invested every resource, every moment of energy into ensuring survival. And as months passed, they grew stronger, more prepared, and more confident that when the threat arrived, they would be ready. The silence that the Council had misunderstood as weakness was, in fact, humanity's greatest strength. No one outside their own species could see it yet, but everything was changing. The humans had stepped back, but they had not disappeared. They were watching, learning, preparing, and waiting. And soon, when the moment came, their actions would speak louder than any warning ever could. For now, the Council continued in ignorance, and humanity worked in quiet determination, building the foundation for a response that would shock the galaxy. Every calculation, every ship, every trained pilot was part of a plan designed not for fame or glory, but for survival. And that difference, simple as it seemed, made all the difference in the universe. Months of preparation passed quietly for humanity. From the outside, the galaxy seemed calm, but humans had never been more alert. Every day, their sensors scanned distant systems, tracking unknown movements with precision. Pilots practiced endless drills, engineers strengthened ships, and colonies ran coordinated exercises to ensure everyone could act together in a crisis. Humans moved like one organism, calm, careful, and determined. They did not rush, panic, or make unnecessary noise. Every step was deliberate. Every action mattered. The Council, meanwhile, still believed humans were simply absent. Some of its members even joked about Earth's temper tantrum, while others shook their heads, wondering if humans had grown too confident. They assumed the galaxy's threats were manageable because, in their view, humanity was not present to influence the outcome. They had no idea how wrong they were. Began with small signals. Observers in the outer sectors reported unusual activity, ships moving silently, objects appearing and disappearing along distant borders. Some species were curious, but they did not suspect humanity. The Council dismissed the reports, claiming the signals were natural phenomena or minor glitches in tracking systems. They believed that, if there was a real problem, humans would raise their voice. After all, that had always been the pattern. Humans spoke loudly when danger was near. Humans never stayed quiet. But now, silence had become their signal. Humans had learned long ago that preparation was more powerful than words. Warnings could be ignored. Arguments could be dismissed. But careful, patient action could not. And humans were acting. The first true test came when small fleets from an unknown force entered the outermost systems. These fleets were small, almost scouting in nature, but they moved faster than anyone had expected. The Council received word quickly, panic rising in their meeting halls. Members argued over what to do, but their procedures, debates, and bureaucracy slowed them down. They were used to controlling situations through speech and negotiation. They were not used to acting quickly in a crisis without consulting every Council member, every protocol, every manual. Meanwhile, humans reacted immediately but quietly. Fleets that had been stationed along border planets were already in motion. Communication channels, invisible to the Council, shared real-time updates. Pilots adjusted formations in perfect coordination. Supply stations that had been quietly built months earlier provided fuel, ammunition, and repairs in hours, not days. Humans did not panic. They did not shout. They moved with calm precision, ready for what the Council could not yet imagine. The Council scrambled to respond, finally realizing that the danger was real. By the time they attempted to mobilize their own forces, the humans had already secured key positions along the threatened systems. They had blocked the unknown fleets from advancing further. Humans had studied every possible trajectory, every potential weak point, and every risk. Their preparation turned out to be exact. Every decision they made in silence had been for this moment. Council leaders tried to contact humanity, but the human response was calm and measured. They did not yell. They did not blame. They simply stated what had been done, what needed to be done next, and where the threat was likely to go. The council, already panicking, could barely follow the information. Humans were patient and detailed, but the council had grown too accustomed to long debates and slow procedures. They were forced to admit that their pride, their belief in their own superiority, had blinded them for too long. Even as the threat continued, humans moved with intelligence rather than emotion. They used fleets and ships strategically, anticipating movements before they happened. Supply routes were invisible to outsiders. Colonies had been reinforced with infrastructure that no one knew existed. Every pilot, engineer, and soldier knew their role perfectly. Their training, months in the making, now paid off with precision. Humans had quietly built an army capable of responding instantly. And the council, despite their knowledge, could not match this level of efficiency. The unknown fleets tested human defenses, attacking some outposts, but the humans were ready. They had predicted these moves and had stationed forces in advance. While council ships struggled with coordination and conflicting commands, humans countered swiftly, blocking attacks, saving colonies, and neutralizing threats. Every success was quiet, efficient, and without unnecessary drama. They acted like professionals who had done this hundreds of times in simulations. Even if they had never faced it in real life, some colonies watched the skies nervously, expecting panic, but found calm leadership instead. Human commanders communicated clearly, giving instructions, explaining actions, and providing reassurance. Civilians followed directions without confusion. Human preparation had created not only defense, but trust. People did not run blindly. They acted with clarity, confidence, and order. Their calmness was contagious, spreading from colonies to fleets and even reaching some neighboring species who, observed with surprise, the council began to understand the scale of what they had ignored. For decades, they had believed they led the galaxy, guiding younger species like students. They had assumed humans would never act alone, would always wait for approval, and would never risk so much without the council's consent. They were wrong. Humans had prepared quietly, independently, and effectively. Their silence had not been weakness. It had been a plan. As the conflict grew, the council was forced to rely on human intelligence. Humans provided strategic information, showing weak points in enemy formations, advising on where to reinforce, and predicting the next moves of the unknown fleets. The council, desperate and humbled, followed human guidance, even as their pride burned quietly. Every instruction they had once ignored had been proven correct. Every warning they had dismissed was now a lesson in their own arrogance. Humans did not celebrate. There was no arrogance, no anger, no revenge. They acted calmly, decisively, and efficiently. Their goal was not to humiliate the council. It was to protect colonies, save lives, and stop the threat. Every move was made with precision. Every decision was logical, and every action was deliberate. Humanity's silence had been their strategy, and now it was showing its full power. Meanwhile, some smaller species began to take notice. They watched human fleets move like shadows, anticipating threats before they arrived. They saw colonies operating with discipline and efficiency that was far beyond what any other species could manage without constant oversight. Some began to reconsider their assumptions about humans. Perhaps this species, once underestimated and ignored, was far stronger than anyone had realized. The council, humbled and frustrated, attempted to regain control. They tried to order fleets, redirect defenses, and demand reports. But humans had moved beyond them. Humans were no longer asking for permission or approval. They were acting with the authority of knowledge, preparation, and necessity. The Council had to follow, whether they liked it or not. And every decision humans had made months ago now looked flawless in hindsight. Back on Earth, in the quiet of the command centers, humans observed the results of their planning. They watched fleets move, colonies remain safe, and the unknown threat respond to their calculated strategies. No one celebrated loudly. No one cheered. There was only calm observation, adjustment of tactics, and readiness for the next step. Their work was far from over, but the foundation was strong. Every life saved, every outpost protected, every fleet maneuver executed correctly was proof of the silent effort that had gone into months of preparation. The Council finally realized a bitter truth. Their pride had cost them dearly. They had ignored humans, dismissed their warnings, and assumed that words alone were the measure of intelligence. Meanwhile, humans had acted quietly, without ego or drama, and now held the upper hand in the crisis. Their silence had been a lesson in patience, discipline, and careful preparation. In the following days, the unknown fleets began to retreat or were contained, thanks largely to human planning and action. Colonies were safe, communication networks remained intact, and human fleets moved without error. The galaxy had witnessed the first true sign of what humans were capable of when underestimated. And the Council, humbled and cautious, began to respect the quiet strength they had once ignored. Humans did not gloat. They did not demand acknowledgement or reward. Their satisfaction came from efficiency, protection, and survival. Every life saved was proof that preparation and calm action mattered more than speeches, meetings, or pride. Their silence had been misunderstood for too long, but now it had spoken louder than anyone could have imagined. Even as the crisis continued, humans remained steady. They prepared for new possibilities, observed potential threats, and ensured that every colony and fleet was ready for what might come next. They had learned to rely on themselves, trust in preparation, and act decisively without waiting for approval. The galaxy was beginning to see a species transformed, not by power or aggression, but by quiet, disciplined action. The Council would never forget it. Humanity's silence had been their greatest strength, and it had arrived at the moment the galaxy needed them most. Pride had been punished. Preparation had triumphed. And humans, patient and calm, continued to act as guardians of what they valued, proving that silence could be more powerful than words and readiness. The Council had finally begun to grasp the magnitude of what they had ignored for so long. But their pride still blinded many. They could not fully admit that they had underestimated humans. For decades, they had believed themselves to be the leaders of the galaxy, the ultimate decision-makers, and now that certainty was gone, humanity, the species they once considered young and inexperienced, had quietly built a level of preparation and coordination far beyond anything the Council had anticipated. The realization was humiliating, but it could not be denied. Humanity's silence had turned into their most powerful tool. While the Council debated, argued, and sent conflicting orders, humans acted with precision. Every fleet movement, every resource allocation, and every strategic maneuver had been planned months in advance. Humans had anticipated the mistakes the Council would make and positioned themselves to cover them. They did not act to punish the Council, nor to show superiority. They acted to protect their colonies, their people, and the galaxy at large. In one sector, the unknown threat attempted a maneuver that the Council believed would go unnoticed. They assumed humans were still passive, still waiting for permission or guidance. But humans had already predicted the move. Ships that had been quietly stationed in hidden orbits moved into position with perfect timing. They blocked key points, cut off supply routes, and forced the intruders into a pattern of retreat. It was not aggression. It was efficiency. The Council watched helplessly as their assumptions crumbled. The Council tried to respond by sending their fleets into the same sectors. But coordination between species proved difficult. Different fleets had varying communication protocols, different levels of training, and conflicting priorities. By the time they could organize, humans had already corrected the situation. Every attempt to act without humans in control created confusion, wasted resources, and unnecessary risks. The very thing the Council prided itself on, its leadership, had failed. Back on Earth, in the command centers and training hubs, humans continued their quiet work. Engineers monitored every system, adjusting shields, engines, and weapons with care. Pilots reviewed simulations to anticipate every possible enemy tactic. Colonies practiced evacuation and emergency procedures, not in panic, but in methodical preparation. Every citizen had a role to play, and every role was executed with focus and discipline. Their actions were precise, efficient, and deliberate. Nothing was left to chance. The Council began to feel the pressure of their mistakes. News arrived of fleets retreating, colonies being protected, and attacks being neutralized, all orchestrated by humans. The pride that had once blinded them now created tension and frustration. How could a species they had underestimated operate with such competence? How could humans act decisively without the bureaucracy, debates, and endless meetings that the Council relied on? These questions haunted every meeting hall, but answers were hard to find. Not human leaders, however, remained calm. They did not allow themselves to be distracted by the Council's panic or frustration. They knew that the goal was not to teach the Council a lesson, but to protect lives. They focused on strategy, coordination, and communication. Their calmness spread through every colony, every fleet, and every individual involved. Civilians followed instructions efficiently, engineers solved problems quietly, and pilots executed maneuvers flawlessly. It was the kind of coordination the galaxy had never seen from a single species. As humans continued their silent operations, smaller species began to notice. Some were curious, some were cautious, and some were quietly impressed. Fleets moved with precision that few could explain. Colonies operated smoothly under conditions that would have caused panic elsewhere. Supplies were delivered on time, communication was uninterrupted, and strategy was consistently ahead of the unknown threat. Humans had become more than a single species acting alone. They had become a model of efficiency, coordination, and calm decision-making. The Council attempted to regain some control, but their efforts were slow and uncoordinated. Orders were miscommunicated. Fleets arrived late. Colonies were left vulnerable. Every mistake made the humans' preparation look even more impressive. The Council began to realize that their pride had blinded them not just to the threat, but to the true capabilities of humans. The lessons they had ignored were now painfully obvious, and there was no way to hide the truth. Humans did not celebrate their advantage. They did not gloat or make speeches about their competence. Their focus remained on the mission. Every day, they monitored fleets, checked systems, and adjusted strategies. Every night, command centers reviewed data from simulations and real encounters, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. Their calm and methodical approach became the foundation of their success. In one colony, a fleet commander observed the movements of the unknown threat. The enemy tried a bold maneuver, expecting to outsmart humans. But humans had already calculated the possibility. Ships that had been quietly hidden moved into position, intercepting the maneuver and forcing the intruders to retreat. Civilians watched from observation decks, noting the precise timing, the flawless execution, and the absence of chaos. For them, it was not fear or excitement, it was reassurance. Humanity was capable. Humanity was ready. Even as the unknown threat tested human defenses, humanity remained ahead. Engineers fixed damaged systems quickly. Pilots adapted to new tactics, and command centers coordinated movements seamlessly. Every obstacle became an opportunity to improve strategies, strengthen coordination, and ensure safety. Humans were not reacting blindly, They were anticipating, learning, and adjusting in real time. The Council, desperate to maintain authority, tried to assert control over human operations. They sent orders, suggestions, and demands, expecting obedience. But humans, having prepared for independence, followed only what was necessary and logical. They communicated clearly, acted decisively, and ensured the safety of their people. The Council's pride forced them to continue issuing commands, but humans no longer needed permission or approval. Their preparation had made them autonomous, capable of protecting themselves and others without external oversight. In this way, humans transformed the crisis into a demonstration of their capabilities. Their silence, once misunderstood, had become a lesson. The Council could no longer assume that words alone measured intelligence or readiness. Action, preparation, and coordination had proven far more powerful than debate and discussion. Humans had quietly shown that they could lead, protect, and respond with a level of competence that few species could match. Even as the situation evolved, humans maintained a calm and steady presence. Commanders reviewed intelligence reports, fleets adjusted positions, and colonies remained safe. Every decision was deliberate, every movement calculated, and every action precise. There was no panic, no chaos, and no unnecessary risk. The unknown threat tested human defenses, but humans met every challenge with efficiency and focus. The Council, humbled and cautious, began to understand the consequences of their arrogance. They had ignored humanity for too long, believing that pride and authority could replace preparation and action. Now, faced with undeniable proof, they had to acknowledge that humans were not only capable of defending themselves, but were capable of protecting entire sectors of the galaxy with skill and intelligence. Humanity's approach remained simple but effective. They focused on preparation, anticipation, and calm execution. They did not waste energy on arguments, ego, or politics. Their priority was clear: protect their people, secure their colonies, and neutralize threats. The calm, quiet efficiency of humans became a model that other species began to observe and learn from. Even if the Council was slow to admit it, as the unknown threat continued to move through the outer sectors, humans adjusted, adapted, and improved. Every attack was met with a calculated response, every obstacle with a prepared solution, and every challenge with readiness. Their preparation, built in silence for months, now paid off in ways that left the Council both impressed and humbled. Even as the crisis reached new levels of intensity, humans acted not out of fear or anger, but out of responsibility and clarity. Command centers worked day and night. Fleets coordinated with precision. Colonies followed emergency procedures smoothly. And throughout it all, humans remained calm, focused, and confident. They had learned the power of patience, preparation, and quiet action. Their silence had not been empty. It had been a foundation for success. The Council, still struggling to regain control, could only watch as humans demonstrated the strength that had been underestimated for decades. Pride had been punished, and preparation had triumphed. Humans had transformed their silence into action, their patience into strategy, and their independence into a decisive advantage. The galaxy was beginning to see the truth. Humanity was no longer a species to underestimate, and their calm, deliberate actions would shape the outcome of events for years to come. After months of quiet preparation and precise action, humanity finally stepped forward, not with anger, not with pride, and not with dramatic speeches, but with calm authority. They had watched the Council struggle, seen the mistakes made, and understood the weaknesses of the galaxy's leadership. Now it was time to act openly, but on their own terms. Humans had learned that the right moment to intervene was not when others demanded it, but when preparation met necessity. The fleets that had once been scattered and hidden, positions now moved together in visible formations. Colonies, which had been quietly fortified and trained, now operated in full readiness, showing that humans were capable of managing threats at scale. Their actions were not aggressive, but deliberate. Each fleet, each station, and each outpost performed as if guided by a single mind, coordinated, efficient, and precise. It was clear to any observer that humanity had been preparing far longer than anyone had realized. The Council scrambled to regain influence, trying to assert authority over the unfolding events. Messages were sent, orders demanded, and fleets redirected. But humans no longer waited for approval. They acted decisively, following only logic, strategy, and necessity. Every decision was deliberate, every action calculated, and every maneuver executed with precision. The Council could only watch as humanity demonstrated capabilities they had long underestimated. Humans coordinated their efforts to protect colonies under attack. Supply routes were maintained without disruption. Communications flowed seamlessly, and fleets responded to threats instantly. Pilots executed maneuvers that even the most experienced Council members could not anticipate. Engineers repaired ships faster than anyone thought possible, and command centers operated like clockwork. There was no panic, no confusion, and no wasted effort. Everything had been anticipated, and every possibility planned for. In one sector, a fleet of unknown ships attempted a sudden incursion. The Council expected humans to react slowly, to seek guidance or clarification, but humans had already predicted the attack. Ships moved into position, surrounding the intruders before they could advance. Communication between human fleets was flawless, adjustments were made instantly, and the unknown forces were forced to retreat. For the first time, the Council realized that humanity's preparation was not only effective but superior. Despite their advantage, humans did not seek glory. They did not act to embarrass the Council or to show superiority. Their focus remained on safety, strategy, and efficiency. Every life saved, every fleet maneuvered correctly, and every colony protected was evidence of their calm, deliberate approach. They acted not for praise, but for the responsibility they had accepted long ago, to ensure survival and stability. The Council, humbled and frustrated, began to understand the scale of their mistakes. Their pride had delayed action, their arrogance had dismissed warnings, and their overconfidence had almost allowed disaster to spread. They had underestimated humanity for decades, assuming silence meant weakness or apathy. Now they faced the undeniable truth. Humans had been preparing, planning, and acting independently, and the results were undeniable. Humans continued to manage the crisis with quiet authority. They anticipated the enemy's moves before they happened, fortified weak points, and ensured that every colony remained operational. Civilians moved confidently through emergency procedures, following clear instructions from trained leaders. Engineers, pilots, and commanders communicated seamlessly across planets and fleets. It was a network of preparation that had been built in silence, now operating in full view. Smaller species began to notice humanity's efficiency. Fleets moved with precision, colonies functioned flawlessly, and every threat was countered with speed and strategy. Some species began to quietly admire humanity's coordination, realizing that preparation, patience, and calm action could achieve far more than loud speeches or endless debates. Even the Council, slow to admit it, began to see the effectiveness of a species that had acted independently and decisively. Back on Earth, leaders coordinated every move with meticulous care. Intelligence reports were reviewed continuously. Fleets were positioned strategically, supply chains optimized, and colonies reinforced. Every action was calculated, every outcome considered, and every contingency planned. Humans did not act impulsively. They acted deliberately, ensuring that every decision contributed to the larger goal of stability and protection. As the crisis progressed, humanity's advantage became undeniable. The unknown forces began to retreat from positions that humans had secured. Colonies that might have been vulnerable remained safe. Communication networks, previously thought fragile, operated without interruption. Humans had transformed preparation into action, and action into results. Their silence, once misunderstood, had become the foundation of their success. The Council, now fully aware of their own limitations, attempted to coordinate with humans. Messages flowed back and forth, but it was clear that humans were in control. They acted with authority, without arrogance, but with confidence born of months of preparation. The Council had expected to lead, to command, and to direct. Instead, they had been forced to follow, to learn, and to acknowledge their own mistakes. Even as humans took control of key operations, they remained focused on their mission. They did not celebrate victories prematurely. They continued to monitor threats, adjust strategies, and strengthen defenses. Every success was met with careful analysis, ensuring that mistakes were minimized and that future operations would be even more effective. Their calm, disciplined approach created stability in the midst of chaos. In one example, a fleet that had been predicted to be overwhelmed faced multiple attacks from unknown forces simultaneously. Human commanders coordinated every ship, directed reinforcements, and ensured that supply lines remained intact. Within hours, the threat was neutralized, and the fleet was operational again. The speed, efficiency, and precision of the operation left other species astonished. It was clear that humans had prepared for every possibility and that their planning had been flawless. Civilians, watching from observation stations, were inspired by the calm authority of their leaders. There was no panic, no confusion, no disorder. Instructions were followed precisely, and operations ran smoothly across multiple planets and systems. Humans had created not only a defense network, but a model of leadership and coordination. Their silence, once a source of confusion, had become a testament to their foresight and determination. The Council, humbled by what they witnessed, finally admitted that their pride had blinded them. They had ignored warnings, dismissed concerns, and underestimated humanity. Now, they were forced to accept that humans were capable of independent action, strategic thinking, and decisive leadership. Their silence had been misunderstood, but its true purpose was now undeniable: preparation, efficiency, and calm execution in the face of crisis. Humanity's return on their own terms demonstrated a fundamental lesson. True strength does not require loud words, threats, or arrogance. It comes from preparation, focus, and the ability to act decisively when the moment demands it. Humans had learned this lesson, and the galaxy was now witnessing its results. As the unknown forces began to retreat further, humanity maintained control of critical sectors. They ensured that every colony was safe, every fleet positioned effectively, and every communication channel secure. There was no haste, no chaos, no unnecessary risk. Every action reflected the quiet power of preparation, patience, and disciplined execution. The Council, finally humbled, realized that humanity had become an indispensable force. They had once underestimated this species, assuming that silence meant weakness. They were wrong. Humanity's silence had been a strategic advantage, allowing them to prepare, coordinate, and act independently. Now the results were clear. Humanity had protected its colonies, managed the crisis, and demonstrated capabilities far beyond what the Council had expected. Even as the immediate threat was contained, humans remained vigilant. They continued to strengthen colonies, adjust fleets, and monitor potential dangers. Their calm, measured approach ensured that the galaxy remained stable. The silence that had once been criticized as passivity was now recognized as foresight, discipline, and true leadership. The Council could only watch, humbled and grateful, as humanity acted decisively. Pride had been punished, preparation had triumphed, and a species once underestimated had proven its worth. Humans had returned on their own terms, showing the galaxy that action, efficiency, and calm planning were far more powerful than arrogance or words. The lesson was clear. Humanity did not need the Council's approval to act. Their silence had allowed them to prepare, and their preparation had allowed them to succeed. In the end, the galaxy had witnessed the power of patience, discipline, and strategic action. Humanity had returned, not to dominate, but to protect, to lead with calm authority, and to show that preparation and foresight could change the course of events more than pride ever could. The galaxy had changed. For years, the Council had believed that words, speeches, and meetings were the true measure of authority. They had thought that silence meant weakness, that patience was a sign of inexperience, and that humans, though clever, were limited by their pride and impatience. They were wrong. Humanity had proven that true strength was not in words, but in preparation, action, and clear thinking. After months of quiet planning, careful coordination, and precise execution, humans had returned. Their fleets moved through key sectors with confidence. Their colonies operated with perfect efficiency, and their command centers coordinated efforts across hundreds of planets. Every move was deliberate, every strategy carefully calculated. Humans no longer needed to convince anyone of their capabilities. The results spoke for themselves. The Council, humbled and anxious, tried to respond. Orders were issued, fleets were redirected, and communication channels were flooded with instructions. But it was too late. Humans had already acted. Every colony had been reinforced, every supply route secured, and every vulnerable sector prepared for attack. The Council realized that their pride had blinded them for too long, and now they were forced to follow humanity's lead. Even the unknown forces, which had once moved freely along the outer sectors, found themselves countered at every turn. Human fleets anticipated attacks before they happened. Supply lines were protected. Communication networks remained uninterrupted. Colonies operated with calm precision, and every emergency was handled efficiently. The enemy was unable to advance, unable to disrupt, and increasingly forced to retreat. Humanity's preparation had turned silence into a shield, and every action into a wall that could not be breached. Humans did not celebrate their advantage. There was no arrogance, no boasting, and no attempt to humiliate the Council. Their focus remained on protecting lives, maintaining stability, and ensuring that the galaxy would survive the threats it faced. Every life saved, every colony preserved, and every fleet maneuvered correctly was evidence of their calm, deliberate approach. Humanity's power was in preparation, not showmanship. The Council could only watch. Every misstep they made, every delay in communication, and every confusion in strategy contrasted sharply with the calm efficiency of humanity. Pride had been their enemy. They had ignored warnings, dismissed advice, and underestimated a species they considered inexperienced. Now, they were forced to admit that humanity's silence had been a strategy, not weakness, and their preparation had proven far more effective than the Council's endless meetings and debates dot in the outer sectors. Human fleets moved with invisible precision. Pilots executed maneuvers that were both creative and calculated. Engineers repaired ships in hours that might have taken weeks in other fleets. Colonies operated seamlessly, with civilians and leaders working together as a single, organized system. Humans had learned to trust in preparation, to act without waiting for permission, and to remain calm even under pressure. Their silence had allowed them to focus. Their preparation had allowed them to act. And their discipline ensured success. The unknown forces, which had seemed unpredictable and dangerous, began to falter. Their attacks were neutralized before they could gain momentum. Supply lines were cut off. Fleets found themselves trapped or forced into retreat. Human strategy was always a step ahead, anticipating movements, preparing counters, and acting with efficiency. The Council, who had once ignored human warnings, could only observe in disbelief. The lessons they had ignored were now clear. Preparation beats arrogance. Action beats words, and calm planning beats pride. Back on Earth, command centers coordinated the overall response. Leaders reviewed reports from every sector, adjusted strategies, and reinforced weak points. Every colony had detailed plans. Every fleet had assigned tasks, and every individual knew their role. Civilians followed instructions calmly. Engineers repaired systems without confusion, and pilots executed maneuvers flawlessly. Humanity's preparation had turned months of silence into a decisive advantage, and the results were visible across the galaxy. The Council attempted to regain control but found their efforts ineffective. Conflicting orders, delays, and misunderstandings slowed their operations. Humans had anticipated these issues and had designed systems to operate independently of external approval. Every Council mistake only highlighted the effectiveness of human planning. Pride had been punished. Preparation had triumphed. Even smaller species, who had previously looked to the Council for guidance, began to notice humanity's leadership. Fleets moved with precision. Colonies remained secure. Threats were neutralized efficiently. Observers saw a species that could act independently, coordinate across systems, and maintain calm authority under pressure. Humanity had demonstrated that silence, discipline, and preparation could achieve far more than speeches, meetings, or pride ever could dot as the crisis reached its peak. Human fleets moved to secure key positions. Colonies that had been vulnerable were reinforced. Communication networks were optimized. Supply routes were fully protected. The unknown forces, overwhelmed by strategy they could not predict, began a controlled retreat. Humanity had turned preparation into action, and action into victory. All without arrogance, all without drama, and all without unnecessary risk. The Council, finally forced to admit their mistakes, approached humanity with humility. For decades, they had assumed humans were dependent, inexperienced, and in need of guidance. Now, they were witnesses to a species that could operate independently, plan with foresight, and act with efficiency far beyond what they had imagined. Pride had blinded them, and they were paying the price. Humans accepted the Council's acknowledgement quietly. There were no grand speeches, no displays of dominance, no calls for reward. Their focus remained on stability, safety, and preparedness. They had proven their strength through action, not words, and they continued to act calmly and deliberately. Every decision was measured, every action purposeful, and every outcome carefully managed. The galaxy watched as humanity's influence grew not through conquest, but through competence. Every colony secured, every fleet maneuvered correctly, and every supply route maintained demonstrated that humans had learned the power of preparation, patience, and silent action. The Council, humbled and cautious, now understood the limits of pride and the value of foresight. In every command center, every fleet, and every colony, humans reflected on the lessons of the past months. They had learned that words alone were insufficient. They had learned that patience and preparation could achieve far more than pride. They had learned to trust themselves, to act decisively, and to remain calm under pressure. And they had demonstrated that these qualities could change the course of the galaxy. The unknown forces, now contained and retreating, would remember humanity's precision. The Council, humbled and wiser, would remember their own mistakes. And the galaxy, as a whole, would remember that a species once underestimated had risen quietly, prepared thoroughly, and acted decisively when it mattered most. Humanity had not sought power for its own sake. They had not sought revenge, domination, or glory. Their actions had been guided by responsibility, foresight, and the desire to protect their people and the galaxy. Their silence, once dismissed as weakness, had been a deliberate strategy. Their preparation, once unseen, had become undeniable. Their calm, measured actions had reshaped the galaxy's perception of what a single species could achieve. As the dust settled, humans continued to operate with quiet efficiency. Colonies remained secure, fleets patrolled key sectors, and communication networks were maintained without interruption. The Council, now fully aware of their past arrogance, began to follow humanity's example, learning that action, preparation, and patience were far more valuable than pride and empty words. The lesson was clear. Pride could blind even the most experienced leaders. But preparation and discipline could change outcomes on a galactic scale. Humanity had acted not out of anger or ego, but out of foresight and responsibility. They had prepared in silence, acted decisively, and emerged stronger and more respected than ever before. The galaxy would never underestimate humans again. Humanity had left in silence, and the Council had paid for their pride. That silence had been the calm before a storm that reshaped the galaxy. Through patience, preparation, and decisive action, humans had proven that true strength comes not from words, but from what is done when no one is watching. The galaxy would remember. The Council would remember. And humanity, having acted with wisdom and care, continued to prepare for whatever the future might bring, calm, focused, and ready.